My name is Audrey, and at 24 years old, I never imagined I would be running for my life from my own family. Growing up as the only daughter in our traditional American household meant one thing: I existed to serve the men, especially my younger brother, Patrick. For years, I cooked his meals, washed his clothes, and cleaned his messes while he lounged around playing video games. But the day I finally refused my father beat me so brutally, I still have scars, both physical and emotional. What happened next changed all our lives forever. Before I continue my story, I would love to know where you are watching from. Drop your location in the comments, hit that like button, and subscribe to hear how I turned this nightmare into my liberation. My childhood in suburban Michigan looked picture perfect from the outside. Our two-story colonial house, with its perfectly manicured lawn and white picket fence, was the embodiment of the American dream. But behind those walls lived a family frozen in the 1950s, where men were kings and women existed only to serve them. My father, James Wilson, ruled our household with an iron fist. As a successful executive at an automotive company, he brought home an impressive salary that my mother constantly reminded me gave him the right to make all the rules. Tall, imposing, with salt and pepper hair that only seemed to add to his authoritative presence, Dad commanded respect and immediate obedience. His word was law, and questioning him was considered the highest form of disrespect. My mother, Eleanor, had once been a bright college student with dreams of becoming a teacher. Instead, she married my father at 22 and became exactly what her own mother had trained her to be: the perfect homemaker. She cooked elaborate meals, kept our house spotless, and catered to my father's every whim. Her blonde hair was always perfectly styled, her clothes modest but presentable, and her smile ever present even when her eyes told a different story. Then there was my brother Patrick, 3 years younger than me, but treated like royalty from the moment he was born. I still remember the day my parents brought him home from the hospital. "Now we have our son," my father had announced proudly, as if I had been merely a practice run until they got what they really wanted. The differences in how we were treated became apparent early on. For Christmas, when I was 10, I unwrapped a toy kitchen set, complete with plastic food and tiny pots and pans. Patrick at 7 received a baseball glove, a remote control car, and a video game console. "These will help him develop important skills," my father explained, when I asked why Patrick got so many more presents. Our chore lists were equally unbalanced. By the time I was 12, my responsibilities included doing the dishes, folding laundry, vacuuming, and helping Mom prepare dinner. Patrick had exactly one chore: taking out the trash once a week, and even that was treated as a tremendous contribution to the household. "You need to learn these skills," Audrey, Mom would say, as she taught me how to iron Dad's shirts. "Someday, you will have a husband to take care of." When I brought home straight, as in high school, my parents offered a cursory good job before changing the subject. When Patrick managed to pull off a C+ average, they took him out for ice cream to celebrate his improvement. "School comes easier to girls," Dad explained dismissively. "Patrick has to work twice as hard, so his achievements mean more." I tried to accept this logic, tried to believe that my role was predetermined by my gender, but something inside me rebelled against this notion. I found refuge in books, reading stories about women who defied expectations and carved their own paths. I stayed late at school to use the library computers, researching colleges that offered scholarships and planning my escape. My academic diligence paid off when I received a full scholarship to a university 300 miles away. For the first time, I felt a glimmer of hope for a different kind of life. The night I told my parents about the scholarship, expecting at least grudging approval, my father frowned. "College is a waste of time for girls," he declared. "You should be focusing on finding a husband." My mother nodded in agreement. "Think about it, Audrey. 4 years spent studying when you could be starting a family. Only when I explained that the scholarship covered everything, meaning they wouldn't have to contribute financially, did my father reluctantly agree. Fine, get it out of your system. But don't come back with any of those feminist ideas. Those 4 years at university were transformative. I thrived in an environment where my intelligence was valued, where professors encouraged me to speak up in class, and where I could dream about a future limited only by my ambition rather than my gender. I made friends with women who had plans to become doctors, lawyers, and CEOs. I dated men who respected me as an equal. For the first time, I realized that the dynamics in my family were not normal or healthy. The more distance I gained both physically and emotionally, the more clearly I could see the dysfunction I had grown up with. But despite this awareness, a part of me still loved my family and hoped that perhaps my success would eventually change their perspective. Little did I know that my time away had only reinforced their beliefs about gender roles, and my return home would trigger a confrontation that would alter the course of all our lives. I graduated summa cum laude with a degree in business administration, walking across the stage with my head held high as my roommate and her parents cheered from the audience. My own family had declined to attend, citing Patrick's baseball tournament as a priority. I told myself it didn't matter. This achievement was mine alone and no one could take it away from me. My plan had been to secure a job in Chicago or New York cities where my skills would be valued and where I could build a life far from the constraints of my childhood home. But the timing of my graduation in 2009 coincided with the worst economic recession in decades. Companies that had been recruiting on campus suddenly implemented hiring freezes. Job offers were rescinded. Even my brilliant classmates with connections found themselves moving back in with their parents. With my bank account dwindling and no immediate job prospects, I reluctantly called home. "Of course you can come back," Mom said, and I detected a note of satisfaction in her voice. "Your room is just as you left it." I packed my belongings, said goodbye to the freedom I had tasted, and drove back to Michigan with a promise to myself that this would be temporary. 3 months, I decided. 3 months to find a job and escape again. The moment I walked through the front door carrying boxes of textbooks and professional clothes purchased for interviews that never materialized, I sensed that nothing had changed. If anything, the gender divide in our household had calcified further during my absence. Patrick, now 22, had grown taller than our father and developed the same authoritative demeanor. He had dropped out of community college after one semester, claiming it wasn't challenging enough, and now lived at home while figuring things out. This apparently involved playing video games, meeting friends at bars, and sleeping until noon. The first morning after my return, I came downstairs to find Patrick sitting at the kitchen table scrolling through his phone while Mom cooked his breakfast. "Morning, sis," he said without looking up. "Mom's making pancakes. I like mine with chocolate chips." The expectation was clear. I was supposed to jump in and help serve him. Instead, I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat down to review job listings on my laptop. Audrey, Mom whispered urgently, "Come help me. Your brother is hungry." "Patrick has 2 hands," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "He can get his own pancakes when they're ready." A look of shock crossed my mother's face, as if I had suggested something obscene. Patrick glanced up with an expression of amused disbelief. "College turned you into a real bitch, huh?" he said casually. Instead of reprimanding him for his language, Mom quickly placed a plate stacked with pancakes in front of him, then shot me a disapproving look. That interaction set the tone for the weeks that followed. I would wake early to apply for jobs online, then leave the house for networking events, or to work on applications at the local library. When I returned, I'd find evidence of Patrick's day: dirty dishes in the sink, wet towels on the bathroom floor, his laundry piled outside my door with an implicit expectation that I would wash it. "Your brother is really busy with his job search," Mom explained, when I questioned why his messes became my responsibility. "I'm job hunting too," I pointed out. "That's different," she replied. "He's focusing on careers with real potential. You should be supporting him instead of being so selfish." The truth was that Patrick's job search consisted of occasionally scrolling through listings before declaring there was nothing worth his time. Meanwhile, I had created spreadsheets to track applications, followed up with hiring managers, and practiced interview questions daily. One afternoon, I was in the middle of a phone interview for an entry-level marketing position when Patrick barged into my room without knocking. "I need the car keys," he announced loudly. I covered the phone and whispered furiously, "I'm in an interview." He rolled his eyes and continued at the same volume. "Just give me the keys. My friends are waiting." The interviewer on the phone clearly heard the disruption. "Is this a bad time, Miss Wilson?" she asked. "No, I'm so sorry about that," I stammered, but the professional moment was shattered. The interviewer ended the call, promising to be in touch, but I knew I had lost the opportunity. When I confronted Patrick about his behavior, he shrugged. "Not my fault you were doing your little interview in the middle of the day when people are trying to live their lives." The situation with my father was no better. Each evening at dinner, he would interrogate me about my job search while barely acknowledging Patrick's complete lack of progress. "Administrative assistant," he scoffed when I mentioned an interview. "That's beneath someone with your education. You should be looking for a husband instead. Women's careers are secondary anyway." The irony that he simultaneously dismissed my career ambitions while criticizing my job targets was not lost on me. The breaking point came one Sunday evening. I had spent the afternoon preparing for an important interview, the next day researching the company and preparing thoughtful questions. When I came downstairs to make a cup of tea, I found the kitchen in disarray. Dishes were piled in the sink, crumbs covered the counter, and a pot of half-eaten pasta sat congealing on the stove. Patrick was sprawled on the living room couch, watching a football game surrounded by empty soda cans and chip bags. "Patrick, could you please clean up your mess in the kitchen?" I asked. "I need to prepare for my interview tomorrow." He didn't even look away from the television. "That's women's work. Mom will do it when she gets back from her church thing." Something inside me snapped. 4 years of education and growth, of being treated as a valuable human being with ideas and potential, had made it impossible to silently accept this treatment anymore. "No," I said firmly. "Mom is not your maid, and neither am I. You made the mess, you clean it up." That got his attention. He turned to look at me with an expression of genuine confusion, as if I had started speaking in a foreign language. "What's your problem?" he demanded. "This is how things work here. Men do men's work, women do women's work." "That's not how the real world works anymore," I replied. "In the real world, adults clean up after themselves, regardless of gender." Patrick stood up, using his height to try to intimidate me. "Well, this isn't the real world. This is Dad's house, and in Dad's house you do what you're told." "I'm not touching those dishes," I stated calmly. "And I'm not doing your laundry anymore either." His face flushed with anger. "Dad's going to hear about this." "Good," I replied. "It's about time we had this conversation." When my parents returned home and found Patrick and me in a standoff with the kitchen, still a disaster, my father's face turned an alarming shade of red. "Family meeting," he announced in a tone that brooked no argument. "Living room, now." The living room had always been the site of family meetings, those rare but significant occasions when my father felt the need to address what he called behavioral corrections. The formal furniture rarely used except for these meetings, and when company visited seemed to amplify the gravity of the situation. My father took his usual position in the large leather armchair that everyone understood was exclusively his. My mother perched nervously on the edge of the matching love seat, her hands fidgeting with the cross pendant she always wore. Patrick sprawled confidently on the couch, one arm stretched across its back in a posture of casual entitlement. I chose to stand a small act of defiance that did not go unnoticed. "Sit down, Audrey," my father commanded. "I prefer to stand, thank you," I replied quietly. His jaw tightened, but he apparently decided this wasn't the battle he wanted to fight first. "Fine. Stand if you want to be difficult." The heavy curtains were drawn against the early evening light, and the room felt oppressively warm. Family photos lined the mantelpiece, carefully arranged to show our supposed happy moments, vacations, holidays, school events. Looking at them now, I noticed how in almost every image, my mother and I were positioned slightly behind my father and Patrick. "It has come to my attention," my father began in his executive boardroom voice, "that there is an attitude problem in this house." He fixed his gaze on me. "Patrick tells me you're refusing to help with household duties." I took a deep breath. "That's not accurate, Dad. I'm refusing to clean up messes that Patrick makes and is perfectly capable of handling himself." My father's expression darkened. "In this family, we have traditional values. That means we all have our roles. And those roles are determined by gender rather than fairness or ability," I asked. "Don't get smart with me," he snapped. "Those roles are determined by thousands of years of human civilization. Men provide and protect. Women nurture and support. That's the natural order." I thought of my female professors, of the women executives who had visited our business classes of my classmates with their ambitious career plans. None of them seemed to be violating any natural order. "Dad, I respect that you have certain beliefs," I said carefully, "but I've spent 4 years learning about business and organizational management. Modern research shows that households and workplaces function better when responsibilities are shared equitably." My father dismissed this with a wave of his hand. "Liberal propaganda from your professors. The real world works differently." "But I've seen the real world," I countered. "And in the real world, adult men don't expect their sisters to do their laundry." Patrick snorted. "Look at Miss Feminist over here. Got a college degree, and suddenly thinks she's too good to help her family." I turned to him. "I'm happy to help our family. What I'm not happy to do is be your personal servant while you contribute nothing." My mother finally spoke, her voice strained. "Audrey, please. Your brother works hard in his own way. He needs support right now." "And what about my needs?" I asked her. "I'm also looking for a job. I also have stress. Why is his time more valuable than mine?" That's when my mother said the words that would forever change how I saw her. "You're a girl. You serve him. He's a boy. He deserves better." The room went silent. Even Patrick looked slightly uncomfortable with how explicitly she had stated the family philosophy. "So I deserve less because I was born female?" I asked quietly. My father stood up, towering over me. "Enough with the victim act. This is about responsibility and respect. Your mother and I have worked hard to provide a good home, and this is how you repay us, by bringing in radical ideas and disrupting the peace." "I'm just asking to be treated with basic dignity," I replied, fighting to keep my voice steady. "Dignity is earned through service," he countered. "And right now, you're failing at your most fundamental duties. Patrick's laundry has been sitting there for 3 days. Either do your job or find somewhere else to live. The ultimatum hung in the air: do his laundry or get out. I looked at each of their faces, my father's righteous anger, my mother's anxious disapproval, my brother's smug expectation that I would eventually cave, as I always had before. In that moment, I made my choice. No, I said simply. I won't do it. My father's face contorted with rage. What did you just say to me? I said no, I repeated louder this time. I'm not doing Patrick's laundry. I'm not cleaning up his messes. I'm not cooking his meals while he sits and watches. I'm an adult with a college degree, not a servant. The first blow came so suddenly I had no time to react. My father's open palm connected with my cheek with such force that I stumbled backward. The shock of it froze me in place, even as the sting spread across my face like fire. James, my mother, gasped but made no move to intervene. You ungrateful little bitch, my father snarled, advancing on me. After everything we've done for you. His next strike knocked me to the floor. I raised my arms to protect my face as he towered over me. You think you're so smart with your fancy degree. He grabbed my arm, yanking me halfway up, only to shove me back down. You think you know better than me how my household should run? I caught a glimpse of Patrick, watching a disturbing mixture of shock and satisfaction on his face. This was the lesson he had always been taught: women who step out of line get put back in their place. My father's foot connected with my ribs, sending a burst of pain through my side. I will not have disobedience in my house. Through the pain and fear, I saw my mother cover her mouth, tears streaming down her face, but she remained seated. Her silence was as painful as my father's blows. The assault continued for what felt like an eternity, but was probably less than a minute. Each blow was punctuated by his ranting about respect, tradition, and my ingratitude. When he finally stepped back, breathing heavily, I lay curled on the floor, my body throbbing with pain. Get up, he ordered coldly. Slowly, I pushed myself to my knees, then to my feet, using the wall for support. I could taste blood where my lip had split. Now he said, his voice deadly calm, you will go upstairs, do your brother's laundry, and then stay in your room until you're ready to apologize for your behavior. I stood there, swaying slightly, saying nothing. Did you hear me? Demanded. Yes, I whispered, not in submission, but because it was all I could manage through the pain. Good. Go. I limped toward the stairs, aware of their eyes on me. My mother finally moved, reaching out as if to help me. Don't, my father warned her. She brought this on herself. As I climbed the stairs, one painful step at a time, I heard my mother's voice, small and defeated. Audrey should have known better than to provoke him like that. In that moment, I understood that this house had never been a home for me. It was a prison, and my family were not my protectors but my jailers. I made it to my room and closed the door. Through the wall, I could hear the television turn back on downstairs, the normal sounds of family life resuming as if nothing had happened. As if my father hadn't just beaten his adult daughter for refusing to be a servant. I curled up on my bed, my body aching, and let the tears come. But even as I cried, something else was crystallizing within me, a determination that would change everything. The soft click of my bedroom door being locked from the outside should have been the final humiliation. Instead, it became the sound of my liberation. Alone in my childhood room, surrounded by remnants of a life I had outgrown, I allowed myself 30 minutes to cry. 30 minutes to feel the pain, the betrayal, the heartbreak of realizing that the people who should love you most can sometimes love their own power more. When those 30 minutes were up, I wiped my tears and began to think strategically. The business student in me took over analyzing my situation as if it were a case study in crisis management. My resources were limited. My phone had been left downstairs in the chaos. My laptop was with me, but the home Wi-Fi password had recently been changed, likely by Patrick. I had approximately $200 in cash, hidden in my copy of Pride and Prejudice. My car keys were in my purse, which was hanging on the coat rack by the front door. My injuries needed assessment. Looking in the small mirror above my dresser, I catalogued the damage, a split lip reddening marks on my cheek that would become bruises and pain in my ribs that made deep breathing difficult. Nothing appeared to be broken, but I knew the psychological damage ran deeper than any physical wound. As darkness fell outside my window, I heard my parents' bedroom door close for the night. Patrick's heavy footsteps passed my door, paused momentarily, then continued to his room. The house settled into silence, but I remained wide awake, my mind racing with possibilities. The first revelation came like a lightning bolt. I had been complicit in my own oppression. For years I had performed the role assigned to me, believing that keeping the peace was worth the sacrifice of my dignity. Every time I had silently taken on Patrick's chores, every time I had swallowed my objections to my father's pronouncements, I had reinforced the system that now held me captive. The second revelation followed quickly. Nothing would change unless I changed it. My father would never suddenly realize the inequality of his expectations. My mother would never find the courage to stand up for me if she couldn't stand up for herself. Patrick would never voluntarily surrender his privileged position. If I wanted a different life, I would have to build it myself from scratch if necessary. With this clarity came determination. I reached for my laptop and opened a blank document. At the top, I typed exit strategy. By the pale blue light of my computer screen, I began to map out a plan. The first priority was establishing financial independence. Without money, I would remain vulnerable. I created a list of companies in Chicago, Detroit, and Indianapolis where my skills might be valued. I drafted a new resume that emphasized my leadership activities and analytical abilities. Next, I needed a safe place to go. I thought of Lisa, my college roommate, who had started a job in Chicago. We had stayed in touch, and she had mentioned having a spare bedroom in her apartment. I would need to contact her as soon as I regained access to my phone or internet. I also needed to protect myself from potential retaliation. My father's violence had shocked me, but in retrospect, the signs had always been there in his rigid control, his quick temper, his belief in his absolute authority. I decided to document everything. Using my laptop's camera, I took photos of my injuries. I opened a new document and wrote down in meticulous detail exactly what had happened during the family meeting and subsequent assault. As the night deepened, my plan grew more detailed. I would need my birth certificate, social security card, and other important documents that were stored in my father's home office. I would need to open a new bank account at a different bank than the one my parents used. I would need to gradually move my possessions out of the house without raising suspicion. The logistics were challenging, but not impossible. The greater challenge would be maintaining the facade of submission long enough to execute my plan. I would need to convince my family that I had accepted my lesson, that I was once again the compliant daughter they expected me to be. The thought of pretending made my stomach turn, but I reminded myself that temporary compromise for strategic purposes was not the same as surrender. Sometimes retreating from a battle was necessary to ultimately win the war. As the first light of dawn crept through my curtains, I heard movement in the hallway. A gentle knock at my door was followed by the sound of the lock turning. My mother's face appeared in the doorway, her expression a mixture of concern and wariness. Your father says you can come down for breakfast if you're ready to behave, she said softly. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. She noticed my swollen lip and the darkening bruise on my cheek, and her eyes filled with tears. "Oh, Audrey," she whispered, "why did you have to push him like that? You know how he gets when he's challenged." The victim blaming was so expected, it almost didn't hurt anymore. Almost. "I'm sorry, Mom," I said, the lie bitter on my tongue. "I'll try to do better." Relief washed over her face. "That's my good girl. Come down when you're ready. I made your favorite blueberry pancakes." As she left, I took a deep breath and prepared to play my role. For now, I would be the daughter they wanted. I would do Patrick's laundry with a smile. I would clean his messes without complaint. I would nod agreeably at my father's pronouncements about a woman's place. And all the while, I would be planning my escape. The next 2 weeks were an exercise in calculated submission. I performed my expected duties with apparent acceptance, earning approving nods from my father and grateful smiles from my mother. Patrick quickly settled back into his entitled routine, leaving messes in his wake with the confidence that they would magically disappear. But beneath this compliant exterior, I was working tirelessly on my liberation. During a trip to the grocery store, I used the public library's computers to email Lisa about my situation. Her response was immediate and unhesitating. "Come stay with me as long as you need. Just say when." On another errand, I opened a new bank account at a credit union across town, depositing my meager savings where my parents couldn't access it. Late at night, while the household slept, I carefully collected my important documents from my father's filing cabinet, replacing them with convincing photocopies that would pass a cursory inspection. I applied for jobs relentlessly using my phone during solo errands and the library computers whenever possible. After numerous applications and 3 phone interviews conducted from the privacy of my car, I received an offer for an entry-level marketing position at a small but growing company in Chicago. The salary was modest but sufficient for independence, and the start date was in 2 weeks. The final piece fell into place when I reconnected with Mrs. Hernandez, our neighbor, who had lived next door since I was a child. She had always been kind to me, slipping me books about strong women throughout my adolescence. When I ran into her at the local coffee shop, and she noticed my healing bruises, she didn't need me to explain. "My door is always open to you," she said, simply pressing a spare key into my palm. Day or night. The night before my planned departure, I lay awake in my childhood bed for the last time. Doubt crept in, as it often does before life-changing decisions. Was I overreacting? Was I throwing away family bonds that could never be replaced? What if I failed on my own? Then I gently touched the still tender spots on my ribs, reminders of what happened when I dared to claim my basic dignity. I remembered my mother's words. "You're a girl. You serve him. He's a boy. He deserves better." And I knew with absolute certainty that I deserved better too. 2 weeks after my father's violent outburst, the atmosphere in our house had settled into a tense normalcy. On the surface, I had returned to my assigned role-performing household duties without complaint. My parents interpreted my quiet compliance as submission, never suspecting that behind my downcast eyes lay a mind working through the final details of my imminent departure. The bruises on my face had faded to yellow shadows easily concealed with makeup. The deeper bruises, both physical and emotional, remained hidden beneath my clothes and my carefully maintained facade. It was a Thursday evening when my father announced another family meeting. "Time to put this unpleasantness behind us properly," he declared over dinner, his tone suggesting this was a generous gesture on his part. Audrey's punishment period is over. We'll discuss expectations going forward. My heart raced as I nodded meekly. This was not part of my plan. I had intended to leave the following morning while everyone was out of the house, avoiding a potentially dangerous confrontation. Now I would have to adapt. The living room looked the same as it had 2 weeks ago. The same formal furniture, the same family photos, the same heavy curtains blocking out the world. But I was not the same person who had stood here before. That Audrey had still been hoping for understanding for her family, to see her as an equal. This Audrey knew better. My father took his customary seat in the leather armchair, my mother beside him on the love seat. Patrick lounged on the couch, scrolling through his phone with apparent disinterest. This time, when my father gestured for me to sit, I did so without argument, choosing a straight-backed chair near the door. Acquiescence as strategy rather than surrender. I believe we've all had time to reflect on recent events. My father began, his voice carrying the self-satisfied tone of someone who believes they have successfully restored order. Audrey has shown a much improved attitude, and I think we're ready to move forward as a family. My mother nodded encouragingly. Patrick didn't look up from his phone. Before we do, my father continued, I think Audrey has something she would like to say to us all. He looked at me expectantly. An apology would be appropriate, don't you think? This was the moment of truth. I could maintain my facade for one more day, offer the apology he wanted, and proceed with my original plan. The safer choice, certainly. Or I could speak my truth now with the car packed and my escape route planned. Riskier, but also more honest. I chose truth. You're right, Dad, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. I do have something to say. His pleased expression told me he was anticipating contrition. He would be disappointed. 2 weeks ago in this room, you physically assaulted me for refusing to be treated as less than human, I stated calmly. You hit me, kicked me, and locked me in my room like a prisoner. The smug look vanished from his face, replaced by darkening anger. That's not what happened. It is exactly what happened, I countered, reaching into my pocket. I removed my phone and pulled up the photos I had taken of my injuries that night. Here's the proof. I held the phone toward them, cycling through images of my bruised face, the marks on my arms, the discoloration along my ribs. My mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Patrick finally looked up from his phone, his expression unreadable. You provoked me, my father said, but there was a new note in his voice, defensiveness. No one provokes being beaten, I replied. Nothing I could possibly say or do would justify what you did. This is ridiculous, he blustered. A parent has the right to discipline their child. I'm 24 years old, Dad. I'm not a child. And even if I were, there's a world of difference between discipline and abuse. The word abuse hung in the air like a thunderclap. No one in our family had ever named what happened in our house, not through all the years of my father's explosive temper, his controlling behavior, his rigid enforcement of his authority. How dare you, he hissed, half rising from his chair. I stood quickly, maintaining distance between us. I've been offered a job in Chicago, I announced. I start Monday. I'm leaving tomorrow. The hell you are, my father growled. You live under my roof. You live by my rules. Not anymore, I replied. I'm moving out. He advanced toward me, his hands curling into fists. You ungrateful little. I held up my phone. Touch me again, and I'll press charges for assault. I have the evidence, I have witness statements, and I'm not afraid to use them. He froze, genuine shock spreading across his face. The concept that I might hold him accountable had clearly never occurred to him. You wouldn't dare, he said, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. Try me, I challenged. One more bruise, and I go straight to the police. My mother began to cry, soft, broken sobs that filled the silence. Please, Audrey, we're your family. You can't do this to us. I'm not doing anything to you, I told her gently. I'm doing something for myself. I'm choosing to live in a home where I'm not beaten for having opinions, where my worth isn't determined by my gender, where love doesn't come with conditions of servitude. Patrick stood up abruptly. This is bullshit, he muttered, but his face had flushed red. For the first time, I wondered if somewhere beneath his entitled exterior he felt shame about his role in all this. I've already packed what matters, I continued. I'll be leaving first thing in the morning. You walk out that door, don't bother coming back, my father threatened, falling back on his ultimate weapon exclusion from the family. That's your choice, I replied. My door will always be open if you ever want to have a relationship based on mutual respect. But I won't compromise my dignity anymore, not for any of you. I turned to leave the room, but my father's voice stopped me. What about Patrick's laundry, the house your mother needs help? I turned back slowly. Patrick is 22 years old, with 2 functioning arms and legs. He can do his own laundry. Mom is an intelligent, capable woman who deserves a partner, not a master. And you, Dad, need to decide what's more important, your control or your daughter. The 3 of them stared at me as if I had started speaking in tongues. In a way I had. The language of self-respect was foreign in our household. This conversation is over, I said quietly. I'll be in my room packing the last of my things. Please don't try to stop me. I walked out, leaving them in stunned silence. In my room, I methodically continued the packing I had started days ago, carefully selecting items with both practical and sentimental value. The weight of what I was doing, of severing ties with my family of origin, pressed heavily on my heart, despite my certainty that it was necessary. A soft knock on my door startled me. I tensed, preparing for another confrontation, but it was my mother who entered, her eyes red from crying. Please don't go, she whispered. Your father will calm down. Things will get better. I looked at this woman who had given me life, but had never shown me how to truly live it. No, Mom, they won't. Not unless something fundamental changes, and I don't see that happening. We love you, she insisted. I know you do, I acknowledged. But the way you love is hurting me, and I can't let myself be hurt anymore. She sat heavily on my bed, suddenly looking older than her years. What will I tell people, the neighbors, our church? Even now, her concern was for appearances rather than my well-being. Tell them whatever you need to, I said gently. Tell them I got a great job opportunity. Or tell them the truth that might be interesting. I don't know how to be any different than I am, she admitted quietly. I know, Mom. That's why I have to go. She left without another word, her shoulders slumped in defeat. Later, I heard another knock, firmer this time. Patrick stood awkwardly in the doorway, his usual swagger noticeably absent. So you're really leaving, he said, making it half question, half statement. Yes. He shifted uncomfortably. Look about the laundry and stuff. I didn't think it was that big a deal. It wasn't just about the laundry, Patrick. It was about respect, about seeing me as a person with equal value. He looked genuinely confused, but Dad always said. Dad is wrong, I interrupted. And someday when you have children of your own, I hope you'll understand that. I hope you'll raise your daughters to know their worth and your sons to respect women as equals. Something shifted in his expression, a momentary glimpse of the brother I had once adored before our parents' expectations had corrupted our relationship. I'm sorry he hit you, he said finally. That was messed up. It wasn't much, but it was something. Yeah, it was. Will you? Will you stay in touch? He asked hesitantly. That depends on you, I told him honestly. If you want a relationship with me, it has to be one of mutual respect. He nodded slowly, processing this new paradigm. As he turned to leave, he paused. For what it's worth, I think you're pretty brave. The next morning, I rose before dawn. My few remaining possessions were quickly loaded into my car. As I made one final sweep of my room, ensuring I hadn't forgotten anything essential, I heard heavy footsteps in the hallway. My father appeared in the doorway, still in his bathrobe, his face a mask of anger and disbelief. So, that's it. 24 years of providing for you, raising you, giving you everything, and this is how you repay us, by abandoning your family. I looked at him steadily. I'm not abandoning anyone. I'm saving myself. From what he demanded. From becoming someone I don't want to be. From accepting that I deserve less because I'm a woman. From believing that love comes with bruises. He flinched at that last part. One time. I lost my temper one time. Once was enough, I said simply. And it wasn't just once. It was a lifetime of small violences, of teaching me that my worth was tied to my usefulness to men. We stood facing each other, across the space of my childhood room, two adults who shared blood, but no longer shared values. I hope someday you can understand, I told him. I hope someday we can build something better than what we had. Don't count on it, he growled. As I walked past him toward the stairs, he made no move to stop me. My mother waited at the bottom, tears streaming silently down her face. I hugged her, briefly feeling the familiar scent of her perfume, wondering if this would be the last time. You always have choices, Mom, I whispered in her ear. Remember that. Patrick was nowhere to be seen, but as I opened the front door, I spotted him watching from the window of his room. I raised my hand in a small wave. After a moment's hesitation, he returned the gesture. On the front step of my childhood home, I took a deep breath of the morning air. It tasted like freedom. My first night of freedom was spent on an air mattress in Lisa's spare bedroom in Chicago. The space was small, barely fitting the mattress in my suitcases, but it felt more like home than the house I had just left. Lisa had welcomed me with open arms, asking no questions when I arrived with a car full of possessions and eyes full of complicated emotions. We'll talk when you're ready, she said, handing me a glass of wine. For now, just breathe. And breathe. I did deep gulps of air that felt different in my lungs, no longer constricted by the weight of expectations I could never meet. That first night, I experienced a tornado of feelings, elation at my newfound freedom, grief for the family relationships. I had lost fear about my uncertain future, and underneath it all a steady current of pride in my own courage. Sleep came fitfully interrupted by dreams where my father burst through the door, dragging me back to Michigan. I woke several times, in a cold sweat, needing a moment to remember that I was safe, that I had escaped, that I was in control of my own life now. The following Monday, I started my new job at Market Edge, a boutique marketing firm specializing in digital strategies for small businesses. My role as a junior account coordinator was entry-level, but it offered growth potential and, most importantly, a legitimate salary that would eventually allow me to find my own apartment. On my first day, I was introduced to a team of professionals who asked about my ideas rather than my laundry skills. My supervisor, Jennifer, a sharp woman in her 40s, reviewed my first assignment and offered constructive feedback instead of dismissive criticism. When I spoke in meetings, people actually listened. It was intoxicating to be valued for my mind. The first week passed in a blur of new faces, processes to learn, and adjusting to city life. I threw myself into work grateful for the distraction from thoughts of home. In the evenings, Lisa and I would cook dinner together, sharing the tasks equally without any discussion of whose job it was based on gender. These simple acts of domestic equality felt revolutionary. By the second week, my phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "We miss you. Dad's still angry, but he'll come around. Please call." I stared at those words for a long time, recognizing the pattern they represented. My father would be angry until I apologized and returned to my designated role. My mother would serve as the intermediary, the peacemaker, whose peace always required my surrender rather than his growth. I didn't call. Instead, I focused on building a support network in Chicago. Lisa introduced me to her friends, a diverse group of young professionals with ambitions and opinions they weren't afraid to express. I joined a book club at the local library and a weekend hiking group. Slowly, I began to develop friendships based on mutual interests rather than geographical proximity or family obligation. A month into my new life, my phone lit up with my brother's name. My finger hovered over the decline button before curiosity won out. "Audrey, it's Patrick." His voice sounded different, lacking the entitled edge I was accustomed to. "I know who it is," I replied, perhaps more coolly than necessary. "What do you want?" I wanted to tell you that I learned how to use the washing machine." Of all the things I might have expected him to say, this wasn't one of them. Congratulations on mastering a skill most people learn in middle school. He laughed a short, self-deprecating sound. I'd rarely heard from him before. "Yeah, I deserved that. But seriously, after you left, things were weird here. Mom kept trying to do everything for me like usual, but I don't know. It felt different knowing why you left." "And how is Dad?" I asked cautiously. "Still pissed. He doesn't say your name, just refers to you as your sister when he has to talk about you at all. But I think he's also confused, like he genuinely doesn't understand what happened." "What happened is that he assaulted his adult daughter for demanding basic respect," I said flatly. I know Patrick admitted surprising me again, and that was seriously messed up. I should have said something. The acknowledgement, however, belated loosened something tight in my chest. "Yes, you should have." "I'm saying something now," he offered. "I'm sorry, Audrey. I was a spoiled brat and I took advantage of how Mom and Dad treated us differently. It wasn't fair to you." I sat down on my bed, momentarily speechless. This was the first genuine apology I'd ever received from a family member. "Thank you for saying that I managed finally." "So anyway," he continued awkwardly, "I've been learning to do stuff. Laundry, cooking, basic things, cleaning up after myself. Mom had a bit of a meltdown about it at first, kept trying to take over, but I told her I needed to learn." "I'm impressed," I said, meaning it. "Don't be too impressed. I still suck at it. Turned all my white shirts pink last week." We both laughed, and for a moment it felt like we were just siblings without the toxic dynamics that had defined our relationship for so long. "They want you to come home," he said, after a pause. "Mom cries about it. Dad would never admit it, but I think he misses you too in his own weird way." "I can't come back, Patrick. Not to how things were." "What if things were different?" he asked. "They'd have to be a lot different," I told him. "And I don't think Dad is capable of that kind of change." "Maybe not," he conceded. "But I'm trying. Does that count for something?" It did count. Not enough to return, but enough to leave the door open a crack. "Keep in touch," I said. "Maybe we can build something new, even if it's just between us." Over the following months, Patrick and I established a tentative relationship based on occasional phone calls and text messages. He sent me photos of his first successfully cooked meals with captions like, "No food poisoning yet." I shared stories about my job and my new friends, It wasn't perfect, but it was something real. My mother's communications were more complicated. Her texts and voicemails oscillated between guilt trips. "It's breaking my heart, not having you home," and subtle attempts to pull me back into old patterns. "Your father's shirts never look right when I iron them. You always did that." Better. I maintained kind but firm boundaries, refusing to engage with manipulation while still expressing love for her. My father remained stubbornly silent. 6 months after my departure, I had saved enough for a security deposit on a tiny studio apartment. It wasn't much, just 400 square feet with a kitchenette and a bathroom where my knees touched the wall when I sat on the toilet, but it was mine. The day I signed the lease, I felt a surge of accomplishment, unlike anything I'd experienced before. This wasn't an achievement that anyone could dismiss or diminish. This was independence earned through my own efforts. I took particular pleasure in decorating my new space with intentional disregard for my father's aesthetic opinions. He had always insisted that walls should be neutral furniture, traditional and decor minimal. My apartment bloomed with color teal walls, a yellow couch found at a thrift store, artwork by local artists featuring bold feminine imagery. Every choice was a declaration. This is who I am when I'm free to choose. At work, my dedication and creativity earned me a modest raise and increased responsibilities. I developed a specialty in social media strategy, helping clients find their authentic voice online, something I found deeply satisfying given my own journey to authentic self-expression. It was during a client meeting that I met Ethan, a web developer, whose quiet confidence and thoughtful questions caught my attention. When he asked for my number after the meeting, I hesitated, old fears surfacing about men and power dynamics. "Just coffee," he said, seeming to sense my reservation. "And if you say no, I promise not to sulk and leave my dirty mugs for you to wash." The specific nature of his joke made me laugh, and also curious. Over coffee, I learned that Ethan had been raised by a single mother who had worked 2 jobs to support him and his sister. He had grown up cooking, cleaning, and taking care of his younger sibling while his mother worked. "In our house, nobody was exempt from chores based on gender," he explained. "You lived there, you contributed. Simple as that." Our relationship developed slowly, built on conversation and mutual respect rather than traditional gender roles. When we cooked together, we shared tasks based on skill and preference. When we disagreed, we talked it out rather than one person imposing their will. It was a revelation to be with someone who saw me as inherently equal, who valued my thoughts and feelings as much as his own. 7 months into my new life, just as things were stabilizing, I received an unexpected call from Patrick. "Mom's in the hospital," he said without preamble. "She collapsed at church. They think it might be her heart." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Despite everything, the thought of my mother in danger sent fear coursing through me. Is she going to be okay? They're running tests. Dad's a mess. I know things are complicated, but I thought you would want to know. I'll come, I said immediately, surprising myself with how quickly the decision formed. Text me the hospital details. The drive back to Michigan was surreal, a reverse journey along the path to freedom I had traveled months before. I called my supervisor from the road, explaining the family emergency, grateful for her understanding and the paid time off I had accumulated. Entering the hospital, I braced myself for a confrontation with my father. Instead, I found him slumped in a waiting room chair, looking smaller and older than I remembered. When he looked up and saw me, a complicated series of emotions crossed his face: surprise, relief, and something that might have been shame. "Audrey," he said, his voice hoarse, "you came." "Of course I came," I replied. "She's my mother." Patrick appeared with coffee cups, his face lighting up when he saw me. "You made it." He handed me one of the cups and gave me a one-armed hug. "They're doing an angiogram now. Should know more soon." The three of us sat in awkward silence, bound by worry for the woman who had been the emotional center of our dysfunctional family. "You look well," my father said finally. "Healthy." "I am well," I confirmed. "I have a good job, my own apartment." He nodded, seeming unsure how to respond to this evidence of my successful independence. "Patrick says you're some kind of internet expert now." "Social media strategy," I corrected gently. "It's a growing field." Another silence fell, but slightly less strained than before. When the doctor finally came to update us, the news was cautiously positive. My mother had experienced a mild heart attack. There was blockage that would require medication and lifestyle changes, but no surgery was needed immediately. She would need to stay in the hospital for a few days for observation and to start her treatment regimen. "Can we see her?" I asked. Briefly, the doctor advised. "She needs rest, but a short visit should be fine." My father stood. "I'll go first. She'll want to see me." The old Audrey would have deferred, stepped back, allowed him to assert his primacy. The new Audrey stood her ground. "We should all go together, as a family." He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded once. It was a small victory, but significant. My mother's face when she saw me enter her hospital room, behind my father and brother, was worth every mile of the drive. "Audrey, oh my baby girl, you came." She looked fragile against the white hospital sheets, monitoring wires attached to her chest, an IV in her arm. I moved to her bedside and took her hand. "Of course I came, Mom." Tears filled her eyes. "I've missed you so much." "I've missed you too," I said honestly. My father cleared his throat awkwardly. "The doctor says, 'You're going to be fine, Eleanor. You just need to take it easy for a while.'" "Who's going to take care of everything?" she fretted immediately. "The house, the meals, your shirts?" "I will," Patrick said, firmly, surprising all of us. "Dad and I can manage." "Right, Dad." My father looked uncomfortable but nodded. "We'll figure it out." In that moment, seeing my brother step up and my father acquiesce, I realized that my departure had indeed changed something in our family dynamic. The equilibrium had shifted, forcing adaptation. It wasn't the dramatic transformation I might have wished for, but it was movement in the right direction. As my mother drifted off to sleep, the three of us returned to the waiting room. Patrick went to call other family members with the update, leaving my father and me alone together for the first time since the day I left. "This doesn't change anything," I said quietly. "I'm not moving back." He studied his hands for a long moment before responding. "I wouldn't expect you to. You've built your own life now." It wasn't an apology, but from my father, the acknowledgement of my independent existence was significant. "Your mother would like to visit you when she's better," he added. "In Chicago, I told her I'd drive her." The idea of my father in my colorful apartment, seeing tangible evidence of the life I'd created without his approval or assistance, was jarring. Yet it also represented a potential bridge across the chasm between us. "She would be welcome," I said carefully. "Both of you would." He nodded once. "A businessman accepting terms. Thank you for coming. It means a lot to her." As I drove back to Chicago the next day, after ensuring my mother was stable and improving, I reflected on how family ties can stretch without breaking completely. The relationships might never be what I had once hoped for, but perhaps they could evolve into something different, something with more room for my authentic self. My phone rang through my car speakers, and I smiled seeing Ethan's name. "Hey," I answered. "I'm on my way back." "How did it go?" he asked, genuine concern in his voice. Complicated, I replied. But better than I expected. My mom's going to be okay. And you? Are you okay? The question brought unexpected tears to my eyes. How novel to have someone prioritize my well-being, to see me as the protagonist of my own story rather than a supporting character in someone else's. Yes, I said with certainty, I really am. 1 year after walking out of my parents' house, I stood in my expanded one-bedroom apartment preparing for their first visit. My mother had recovered well from her heart attack, following her medication regimen and even joining a gentle yoga class at Patrick's suggestion. My father had retired from his executive position, a transition that seemed to have softened some of his rigid edges. Patrick had moved into his own apartment and was taking business courses at the local community college. And I had flourished. My work had earned me a promotion to senior social media strategist with a comfortable salary increase and my own small team to manage. My relationship with Ethan had deepened into something solid and nurturing. My apartment, once a bare-bones refuge, now reflected my personality in every corner, from the bookshelf, filled with female authors, to the wall of framed photos documenting my new life. I wasn't naive enough to think that one visit would heal decades of dysfunction, but I was strong enough now to establish boundaries without fear. I had prepared a guest room, with fresh linen, stocked a refrigerator, with foods I knew my mother enjoyed, and most importantly, prepared myself mentally for whatever might come. When the doorbell rang, I took a deep breath before answering. My mother embraced me immediately, holding on a beat too long, as if afraid I might disappear. My father stood awkwardly behind her, taking in my space with curious eyes. "Welcome to Chicago," I said, stepping back, "to let them enter, and welcome to my home." My mother moved through the apartment, exclaiming over my decorating choices with genuine admiration. My father followed more slowly, stopping to examine the framed certificate of my recent professional certification in digital marketing strategy. "This is impressive," he said, the compliment falling from his lips with unfamiliar weight. "Thank you," I replied simply. "I worked hard for it." The weekend unfolded with careful navigation around sensitive topics. We visited Chicago landmarks, ate at restaurants, where I was greeted by name, and met Ethan for dinner one evening. Throughout it all, I maintained my authentic self, neither reverting to old patterns of deference nor picking unnecessary fights. The most revealing moment came when my mother offered to help wash dishes after dinner. Working beside her at the sink, I noticed how she kept glancing toward my father seated in the living room. "You don't need his permission to talk to me, Mom," I said gently. She flushed slightly. "Old habits, I guess." "How are things really?" I asked. "Between you two, since your heart attack?" She was quiet for a moment, methodically drying a plate. "Different," she said finally. "He helps more around the house now, actually does his own laundry." She smiled slightly. "Still can't fold a fitted sheet to save his life." "And how do you feel about that?" "Strange at first," she admitted. "Like I was failing somehow, by not doing everything, but now—" She shrugged. "It's nice having time for my garden, for my book club." "You joined a book club?" I asked, surprised. "Patrick's idea. He said I needed interests of my own." Her expression turned thoughtful. I never realized how much of myself I'd given up until I started finding little pieces again. It wasn't a dramatic feminist awakening, but it was something. A small seed of self-reclamation taking root in soil I had once thought too barren for growth. When they left on Sunday afternoon, my father awkwardly patted my shoulder, the closest thing to physical affection he had shown me in years. "You've done well for yourself," he said gruffly. "Your grandfather would have been proud." Coming from him, it was high praise indeed. I accepted it with a nod, neither overreacting with gratitude nor dismissing it with bitterness. Thank you for coming. Drive safely. After they departed, I sat on my yellow couch, processing the complex emotions their visit had stirred up. There had been no grand reconciliation, no tearful apologies for past wrongs. My father had not acknowledged the assault that drove me away, nor had my mother taken responsibility for her enabling role. Yet something had shifted, however slightly, in the family dynamic. I had discovered that healing doesn't always come in the form we expect or hope for. Sometimes it arrives in small moments, my father asking about my work with genuine interest, my mother exploring interests beyond homemaking, Patrick's text messages free from entitled demands, my own ability to be in their presence without shrinking myself. The most profound change, however, was within me. I no longer defined myself in relation to them, no longer measured my worth by their approval. I had built a life that reflected my values, surrounded myself with people who respected me as an equal, and learned that standing up for myself wasn't selfish but essential. In the months that followed, I maintained limited but regular contact with my family. Patrick and I developed a friendship that felt genuinely mutual. My mother called weekly, gradually sharing more of her own thoughts, rather than just reporting on my father's activities. My father and I established a careful cordiality, neither pretending the past hadn't happened, nor allowing it to completely determine our future. The healing extended beyond my family relationships. Through therapy, I began to recognize and address patterns of people-pleasing and conflict avoidance that had been instilled in me from childhood. I learned to identify my own needs and express them without apology. I discovered that setting boundaries wasn't just about saying no to others, but saying yes to myself. My professional life thrived as I brought my authentic voice to my work, advocating for ideas I believed in, rather than deferring to louder voices in the room. My team responded to my leadership style, which emphasized collaboration and mutual respect, rather than hierarchical authority. Perhaps most significant was my decision to mentor young women facing similar struggles with family expectations and gender discrimination. Through a community program, I met regularly with college students navigating the often turbulent waters between family loyalty and personal authenticity. In sharing my story and listening to theirs, I transformed my painful experiences into something that could help others find their way to freedom. 18 months after leaving home, I received an unexpected email from my father. The subject line read simply, "Your article." I had recently published a piece in a business magazine about how traditional gender expectations can undermine workplace collaboration. I had used my own family background as a brief example, though I had changed names and identifying details out of respect for privacy. My father's email was brief. "Audrey, I read your article. You write well. Your points about how rigid roles limit everyone, not just women, made me think. Patrick showed me how to do a Google search about some of the research you mentioned. There might be something to it." Dad, it wasn't an explicit acknowledgement of harm done, nor a direct apology. But from a man of my father's generation and temperament, it represented a significant concession, the possibility that he might have been wrong. I printed the email and added it to a box where I kept meaningful correspondence. Alongside it were cards from colleagues congratulating me on my promotion letters from the young women I mentored, and a handwritten note from my brother that simply said, "Thank you for not giving up on me." That evening, as Ethan and I prepared dinner together in the easy rhythm we had developed, I thought about the difficult journey that had brought me here. The physical and emotional pain, the fear of starting over, the grief of family rupture, all of it had been necessary to reach this place of authentic living. "You're smiling," Ethan observed, handing me a glass of wine. "Good day." Good perspective, I corrected. I was just thinking about how sometimes the hardest choices lead to the best places. He nodded, understanding, without needing elaboration. To hard choices and good places, then, he said, raising his glass to mine. The path to healing is rarely straight or simple. It winds through dark valleys of doubt and grief, climbs steep inclines of confrontation and change, and sometimes doubles back on itself when old patterns reassert themselves. But each step forward, however small, builds the strength needed for the journey. The most profound lesson I learned through my experience was that true dignity cannot be granted by others. It must be claimed for oneself. My father's violence and my mother's enabling were harmful precisely because they sought to deny me this fundamental right to self-determination. By walking away, I reclaimed not just my safety, but my essential humanity. Standing in my own power doesn't mean I stopped loving my family. Rather, it meant I finally understood that love without respect is incomplete, that relationships must be reciprocal to be healthy, and that maintaining my boundaries is not an act of hostility, but of integrity. I don't know what the future holds for my relationship with my parents. Perhaps we will continue to build fragile bridges across the divide of our different values. Perhaps circumstances will again force us to reassess and adapt. What I do know is that I will never again surrender my worth to maintain a false peace, and that knowledge gives me a freedom no one can take away. As I look around at the life I've built from the ashes of what I left behind, I feel a deep sense of gratitude. Not for the pain that drove me here, but for the courage I found to leave, the strength I developed in starting over, and the wisdom I gained in learning to truly value myself. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice between family expectations and your own well-being? I would love to hear your experiences in the comments below. Sometimes knowing we're not alone in these struggles can be incredibly healing. If my story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more journeys of transformation. And if you know someone who might need to hear this message, please share it with them. Remember, you deserve dignity and respect always. Thank you for listening, and may you find the courage to honor your own worth, whatever that journey might look like.